Greetings YouTube, the author Mark Simmons here, back for a second instalment of me reading extracts from the Psionic Powers Trilogy. In episode 2 I will be reading a snippet from chapter 2 of my debut novel Of the Night. In the story so far, our protagonist has managed to escape his captors, and in this scene it's him. He's fleeing for his life, basically. Of the Night is available on Amazon via Poe Boy Publishing. Links are in the description. Once again, I've not rehearsed this, so we'll see how it goes. Cool. Alright, so let's do this. This is chapter 2, extract from chapter 2 called Exiting. He found himself moving towards a chopping sound and the buzz of conversation bursting out from a radio. To his right, the old and peeling wallpaper disappeared and opened out into a small open-plan kitchen, its metal counters lit by strip lights hanging over the various cabinets along the back wall. A large oak table stood in front of the modern installed kitchen, its wooden surface resembling that of a butcher's table. Spread across the large table's surface, the carcass of what Whitfield could only assume to be a cow was in mid-butchery and looked to have been masterfully dispatched so far. A large brown pelt hung from a washing line over the sink, the last few drops of blood falling into the metal plug hole. In front of the sink, a large metal bin sat containing a blue substance bulging from the top of the container. Stood over the bovine's remains was a man of monstrous proportions, draped in a white apron tied in a knot around his thick neck. Standing at well over 6'7", his blonde hair was shaved at the sides and kept long on top, one half of it hanging loose over his eyes, while the other had been flattened and slicked back with some of the animal's blood. His left hand a firm hold on the rib cage of the slaughtered animal, while his right hand was in mid-swing with a large cleaver, but the man's eyes were not on his work. Resting on the severed head of the creature, a laptop was open and facing him, a loud conversation in Russian taking place between the tall man and whoever was on the screen. The arc of the blade came down onto the back of the carcass, separating the rib cage in two, one half holding firm in his grip, while the other rolled off the table before it could be caught. Landing at his feet, Whitfield had only a second to hurdle the chunk of meat as it bounced off the floor right in his path. The giant of a man paused in his heated discussion, looking up from his work, and gave Whitfield a puzzled look. "Leaving so soon?" he questioned in perfect English, but with a heavily accented slur, his arm holding the cleaver above his head, ready to strike again. Whitfield's heart jumped in his mouth, as for a brief second he thought that the blood-soaked butcher was about to throw the heavy blade at him, but the moment passed, and without breaking stride, Whitfield carried on down the corridor. The end of the hallway quickly rushed towards him, presenting two options. He could turn left towards the similar-looking halls, or go up a staircase to his right that went up a dozen steps and then turned back on itself. He paused for merely a second to assess which way would be best. Movement at the far end of the corridor to his left made his breath hold in his throat. Something was lurking in the shadows, an undefinable shape that for a brief second Whitfield thought was moving towards him. He froze for what felt like an eternity as the figure paused and raised its head. The bent-over shape seemed to listen and then sniff at the air before it lumbered away from him at a slow pace. This made up his mind. Once the stairs had turned back on themselves, they threw him out onto another corridor that looked identical to the one he had just fled from. Thinking on his feet, he considered the idea that the corridor ahead was identical to the one below. Then so should be the one to the left. Without breaking stride, he took the left turn. This proved to be a misjudgment on his part, as the left side of his body struck against something just above the corner of the stairwell. The blow to his body knocked him off balance, and with the momentum of his stride, he was sent colliding into the opposite wall. Whitfield felt the wooden wall buckle under the force of the collision. The wind left his lungs as he hit the floor. He looked back towards the offending object and was surprised to see nothing. Was surprised to see not the workings of some hard-wearing stone figurine he had first presumed, but the image of a girl in her late teens. Her hair hung loose down past her shoulders, covering most of her face. Purple, noise-cancelling earphones were around her head, the sound of some indecipherable music creeping out from the side that had been knocked off her ear. A large white t-shirt hung from her frail physique. The black stone-washed jeans, frayed at the knees, clung to her thin legs, and purple military boots barely stayed on her feet. A broken cigarette protruded from what little of her face he could see, the cherry smouldering away as it hung from the last few threads of tobacco before falling to the floor. Less than happy with the meeting of bodies, she showed her frustration by spitting the remains of her cigarette onto the floor. She eyed him side on with a look that he had seen 1,000 times, right before someone was about to take a swing at him. Whitfield did not fancy the wrath of this young lady, so he picked himself up before she could turn his way, and was off again at a high tempo. "Which way you going?" she said over her shoulder, the southern English accent unmistakable in her tone, as she added the word prick, almost as an afterthought. Whitfield quickly removed her from his mind as he kept a steady pace along a similar stretch of corridor. He desperately searched the hallway ahead for anything that would help his cause. In the same area as the kitchen below, a communal area with a variety of lounging chairs filled the small cubbyhole. The image of a doctor's waiting room sprang to mind. The thought of a doctor made him aware of a pain in his right shoulder, and he came to a stop. Looking towards the area in question, he noticed that a small shard of wood sticking up through the material of his t-shirt. "I didn't think I hit the wall that hard." Removing the shard brought a new level of pain, and he had to grit his teeth to hold off from screaming. He focused on the table in front of him as the feeling subsided. What he would have normally expected to see, littered across the table, copies of out-of-date magazines, were replaced with various versions of the Old and New Testament, both open at different stages of the text. A copy of the Quran with its well-used pages face down on the arm of a chair. The Pitika sat on top of the Torah, which in turn propped up a copy of the Vedas, and in a separate pile, the Guru Granth Sahib found unlikely bedfellows with the Iliad and the Kojiki. The literature confused him, but he did not have time to consider it and continued onwards. Reaching the point at where he surmised the library had been on the floor below, he stopped at a door. Inhaling deeply to steady his breathing, he pressed his ear to the wood and listened. Silence reigned from inside, and as he stepped back to try the handle, he noticed the faded outline of a door number. Was he in a hotel? Kadir appeared at the far end of the corridor, sending his heart into his mouth, and he opened the door, darting inside before she noticed him. Dust sheets covered all of the furniture on the right-hand side of the room, the outlines of a wardrobe, dressing table and chair clearly shrouded. Judging by the thick layer of powder that coated everything, the sheets had served their purpose. A four-poster bed filled up the other half of the room. Its sheets and pillows had been packed away for another time. Only the mattress covered in what looked like shrink wrap remained. Heavy curtains took up the entire far wall, and Whitfield presumed that a comparable bay window to downstairs stood behind them. The curtains blocked out any light from the exterior of the house, and the limited hallway light gave him the details of the room. He pushed the door as close to shut as possible, whilst still allowing a little amount of light in, and quickly crept over to the thick black draperies. Pulling them apart, the room came to life as the soft glow of the city flooded into the bedroom. Below the window, a thick cobbled walkway disappeared around the side of the building, a tall, spiked metal fence lining the outer limits of the property. The dark waters of a canal just the other side of the fence shimmered with a dull shade of orange from a nearby street lamp. The drop straight down was too high, 3 stories at least, and he had no doubt that he would break something on the rain-slicked path below. Could he make it to the canal if he jumped? He toyed with the idea as he tried the latch on the window, but he found the hinges painted shut. It's too far, though, surely. Panic began to set in as he found his path blocked by the pane of glass, and he considered smashing the window with his elbow. His eyes caught sight of something just as he was about to strike against the bottom corner. Written in black across the edge of the window's sealant were the words "triple glazed." No matter how hard he struck the glass, it was not going to budge. Instead, he tried to turn the latch again, this time forcing the lock. With a crack, the paint gave way, the window opened outwards, battering wind and rain into the room. That was easier than it looked. He pondered as he studied the size of the window and if he could climb out of it. The sill outside was quite wide, so with a deep breath he lifted a foot out onto it. "Where are you going?" Kadir asked casually from the doorway, her light feet taking Whitfield by surprise as her stature dominated the entire frame of the entrance. The shock of her words threw him off balance. With a flailing arm, he stopped himself from falling forward. He glanced back at the tall woman as she took 2 slow steps into the room. Her right hand beckoned him to come away from the window, and a forced attempt at a reassuring smile edged into the corners of her mouth. Whitfield dared a quick glance out into the waters below. She took another step closer. "You won't make it," Kadir added as she stepped to within touching distance of him, her outstretched hand seeming massive in the synthetic light from outdoors. Whitfield chuckled to himself and turned away from her. "We'll see," he said, and leapt out into the night. There you go. That's chapter 2, Exiting, from Of the Night. I'm not sure whether I pronounced some of those holy books correctly, but oh well. So yeah, hope you enjoyed, and see you next time. Take it easy.